happening self-reflection, personal growth. When all you're doing is thinking, I got an 89 on this paper, I'm gonna fail the class. Again, you're not so good at the math, you're gonna be fine. Excuse me, now I'm choked on nothing. Hang on. Forgive me. So, that's holding us a little bit. So, like many of you, I went to a faculty retreat on my campus. Okay, I know, you're like, ugh. This one was really energizing. I think of it like this conference. I take a lot of notes, I take a lot of pictures, I go home with my brain full of stuff, and then I'm ready to charge forward and do things, right? Sometimes think and reflect before you do all the things. So in this session, we have learned about different methods of grading, and what we're calling these alternative grading methods. So traditional grading, like I said, focuses on extrinsic motivation. What do I have to do to earn the grade I need to do well? You're not really thinking about learning. Students aren't taking risks because they really want to give me what will make me happy to give them the grade they do well. I don't care, don't please me, I want you to learn, right? So it demotivates students, it also perpetuates bias in learning, and we're not really focusing on different learning styles or the chaos of the world around us that can be impacting how we show up to a classroom. Alternative grading, on the other hand, is giving students more voice and choice over their learning experience. We're focusing on some of that intrinsic motivation for learning, where students are authentically engaged. But we as instructors, and here's lesson from Jen number 1, is we also have to be willing to let go of that control. That control over, here's the rubric, here's what I want, here's what you're gonna produce. Grading is super easy, and it becomes a lot messier. So when we talk about alternative grading, some words you might have heard are ungrading, specifications grading, contract grading, going completely gradeless, grading for completion but not against a rubric. All of these are different things you can use, and I'll touch on some of those in my recommendations at the end. So what are some of the benefits of doing these alternative grading methods? For me, it ultimately starts with this pedagogy of care, being inclusive, supportive, and learner-centered. It's not about me, it's about my students and what they are learning in the class. We see greater student engagement when students feel free to make mistakes. They feel free to take risks. They can try different things. They can fail at a thing and not fail the whole class. They're able to try different things and learn through that struggle. You see more autonomy. What do you want to learn in the Foundations of Leadership class? I have 16 weeks to teach you about this topic. There's a bazillion things I could teach. What are you going to take away from that? And it's also shown to foster a smoother transition to college, decreasing that stress and anxiety that students feel when they're chasing points and they're chasing a grade, and they're able to be more present and engaged in the learning process. So I'm going to tell you the story of how I implemented alternative grading methods in a professional development class. So this course is for all of our seniors in our ALEC major. So these are students concentrating in ag education, organizational and community leadership, and agricultural communications. So they're all together in this final course. Now, as Hannah was talking, they take a course their first semester, and I'm already turning my wheels of how are we connecting that first and capstone. But these are all seniors. Last fall, there were 29 seniors in this class. And this class is really focused on helping students develop those essential professional competencies. They are getting ready to go student teach and graduate. So what have you learned in your program with us? Again, they think, oh, I took Lead 260. I did this thing. I learned this thing. And they don't make that leap or that connection to the skills, how they can talk about that on a resume, in a cover letter, in a job interview. They're like, here's my transcript with all my grades. And they think that's it. So this class is about helping them make those connections. So I loved that graphing exercise. I might start to use that. Right now I have them do a crosswalk where they're taking all the things they've done, curricular and co-curricular, and connecting those to tangible skills, and then the assessments or assignments they do in the class are creating their job application packet. They're writing a cover letter and a resume for a job, and I'm giving them feedback on that, on how they're making those connections. They're putting together their professional portfolio. They're coming up with their own personal and professional philosophy. what they want to do, what are their beliefs, what do they stand for. Again, ways to help them think about how do you take all the things you learned in our classes and actually apply them in a professional setting. So what I did this past fall, so full disclosure, I did this once, so don't critique the research, one time, I've learned a lot. Because I really wanted to focus on those qualitative assessments of learning. It's not a class where there's a test. It's not chemistry. There's no right or wrong answer. It's very subjective. So how are we using those qualitative assessments of learning? So things that I provided, I did give deadlines. I did give general expectations of what the assignment would entail. And I gave some criteria, more bullet points, of these are the things you should be thinking about. I did not give a rubric. Life does not operate on a rubric. And a lot of times when students are seniors, they're struggling with, I'm going to go in, how do I know that I did well for my boss? Right? I also oversee our internship program, and students talk about, I don't know if I'm doing this right or wrong. I'm like, well, there is not necessarily a clear-cut right or wrong. So helping students think critically through that experience. So instead I offered feedback and comments on the work that they submitted, but I didn't assign a grade. It was graded for completion. So complete or incomplete if they did it or not. This might be really difficult to read because the screen's smaller than I thought it would be, but some excerpts from my course syllabus is that this class isn't about chasing points or submitting assignments you think will make me happy. The goal is to learn and critically reflect on your learning. I want you to be, you being the student, you to be motivated from within, not by fear. I don't want you to get hung up by points because too often that gets in the way of real learning. I asked students to explain what grade they thought they deserved and why. I wanted them to justify that through kind of their cognitive learning, their critical thinking, kind of ultimately what they learned throughout the course. And they get a say in that. So excerpts from the course syllabus. So what did I actually do here? I had students complete a mid-semester and a final self-reflective evaluation. This is where they kind of talked about with some of these question prompts of what are their strengths, how are they struggling, how are they being challenged in the class, how are they contributing to others' learning. I didn't say this earlier, there were 29 students in the class. We met once a week for 2 hours for the full semester. So it was an in-person class where, again, I highly expect people to be there engaging and conversing and learning through each other. A lot of the activities that we did happened in class. So there wasn't a lot of outside of class research or work they had to do. We did the self-reflective activities together as a class. And then I asked them to assess their progress and their overall engagement. And in the end, I asked some of those questions again, but also what final grade they believe they deserved and why. So I'm going to pause here. Remember I said alternative grading methods. I could go gradeless, I could do all these other things. The biggest issue that I found in doing this is the sense of, I want you to be free to learn. I don't want you to be, everything I just said about why we do these methods, right? And we operate in a higher educational system that requires me to give you a grade. This class is not pass-fail. So I still have to give you a grade. So how do you make that connection? And it was hard, because even though I'm sitting here, I'm jazzed, I'm ready to do these alternative grading methods, in my mind I'm like, well, how am I going to determine what's an A or a B? Because my brain was still operating on a rubric. So I even struggled to let go of all of that. So some feedback from the students. As far as their final course grades go, I have this written down, 90-some-odd% were within 1 letter grade. I had this fear that everyone was going to say, I earned an A. But they didn't. The people who earned in the B range gave themselves within, and when I say a letter grade, I mean they gave themselves a B+, and I would have considered that a B work. The one student who got a C-, I think even gave themselves a C or a C+, because they came to class 2 of 16 times. So they recognized that the C- was even a gift in some of that. Really. But for the most part, students rated themselves as what I would have expected them to receive. So if they weren't showing up to class a lot, if they weren't putting forth a lot of effort into the reflection papers and activities, they owned up to that. And there were very few, 2, who were way off. Who were like, I did excellent. And I'm like, well, I don't know what excellent means to you. But again, we're trying to operate in this subjective sense of what I would consider to be the equivalent of an A or a B with no guidance for them. Student feedback at mid-semester, I had them do a mid-semester evaluation, and 87% felt the grading policy was helpful. They're like, yeah, okay, this is cool. Because students, right, let's think about their mind. There's no grade. This is awesome. Like, I'm not stressed over a grade. I'm not chasing points. This is awesome. And then at the end of the semester, that dropped to 81%. And this kind of connects to this sense of a grading paradox, where it sounds awesome. This is amazing. But then at the end, you get to, I have no sense of what my grade is in this class. I have no sense if I'm doing well. Like Dr. Smith keeps giving feedback. Is this good? Is it bad? Because students are still operating in this, rubric grading scheme. So we're seeing a lot of those tensions come up. So what are my recommendations? Because really what I want to do is share what I've learned through this in case this is something that you might be interested in pursuing. Prepare far in advance. I was talking with some folks at breakfast about how I have these grand ideas and I wanted to start doing them, and then I kind of bite off more than I can chew and don't realize how much time this takes to prepare. Because sitting in a session and learning about this, reading some of the books I'm going to show in a second, I totally got this. But how I translated that to clarify for my students so that they understood took a lot more time. So exploring research, reading the books, diving into the literature, engaging in your own reflective practice. I am an educator who, while I sit up here and say how I want to be focused on critical thinking and meaningful dialogue, I'm still the student who was like, what do I have to do to get an A? How do I function in the rubric? So even my own pedagogy and approach, I'm like, okay, how do I flip this? How do I let go of my control and let students take in the driver's seat of learning? So doing that preparation far in advance of what is your plan, how are you going to do this, and how are you going to communicate this to your students? Knowing what works for you and your own pedagogy, what works for your students, and what works for the course. So I did this in a 29 student professional development senior capstone course for our major. I was intentional in doing that. I also teach a 200-person Foundations of Leadership class. There is no way I'm doing this in that class right now. Maybe someday, but right now with 200 people, there's no way that I could give the quality of feedback on their work that I could give to 20. Even 29 was a struggle, not gonna lie. Weeks went by and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm so far behind. Because it does take time. So knowing what works for you. And you might think you're like, I need this rubric, I need some sense of structure. So knowing what works for you. With everything that we learn about teaching, there are people who do awesome things, and I'm like, I want to be like you, but I also know that I'm not. And so doing things that are comfortable to you, because if you're not comfortable and you're not presenting it clearly to your students, oh, trust me, they can tell. So how are you creating that sense of community of what works for you, your students, and the course that you're teaching? Planning your time. Maybe don't think to do this at the beginning of August before the semester starts. True story. Learn from me. Don't do that. Plan your time. Explain what this means to students. The very first day, I went through my grading policy, my philosophy, and my approach to pedagogy and teaching. Again, a third of the students in the class are going to be future high school ag teachers, so thinking about how we teach and learn. But I never really circled back on that. And students, again, at the outset were like, sweet, that's an awesome idea. But in the operationalization and practice of it, they're like, wait, I don't understand what's going on here, what my final grade will be. So making sure you're explaining that. Providing substantive feedback takes time. It takes a lot of time. So planning that ahead in your time, and then making sure you're engaging in your own reflective practice, which is what I did, which is what led to me writing this practice manuscript of what did I learn, what works for me, what worked, what didn't work in this course. And then consider starting small. So maybe don't decide, I'm gonna go completely gradeless, because again, you're operating in a hierarchical structured system that requires you to give grades. But starting small. So maybe removing grades from some of the formative assessments throughout the semester, and then you're giving a grade at the end for the final product after giving some feedback. In this particular class, what I might do is a contract grading model for next year or this coming fall, where students are then able to say, I will do X, Y, and Z, and if I do it like this, I will earn this grade. If I do this, I'll earn this grade. You might have choices of assignments, like I started to do a lot of pick from options. So you had talked about music. I have a discussion board where they can pick a song or a movie or TV series clip, and they're connecting that in one assignment, because again, some students love music, some love movies. So trying to give students some more voice and choice over what they're doing. Individual student conferences is the other piece of like that interview piece of how are you hearing students' individual stories. So I'm not hip enough to have a QR code, because now that I see everybody having them, I'm like, wow, I should have had a QR code. Instead, I just had pictures of the 4 main books that I use and reference, and thinking about how am I being an inclusive instructor, how am I using inclusive teaching practices. These first 2, Bloom's ungrading and Feldman's grading for equity, are the ones that really talk about kind of these alternative grading methods. So, you come to a conference, you've got a ton of things to your reading list. You even buy them and they sit on a stack on your floor thinking, I'm going to read those someday. I have a great collection, but I haven't told you. And those are references that I know you can't read, but you can certainly take a photo of those. So my hope here was that you learned a little bit about some other alternative grading options. Again, there's a workshop or there's a presentation, a research presentation later this morning, a workshop tomorrow morning, where you can dive into this more. My biggest advice to you is know yourself, know what's going to work for you, what you're comfortable with, know what's going to work within the parameters of your institution, your students, and the course, and try something. Maybe you don't do a complete 180, although if you do, 100% support you in that, but start small. Try some smaller things that are giving students some of that substantive feedback and opportunities for learning, and kind of being the drivers themselves, instead of you being the dictator. These are the things you must do to learn about leadership in this class, right? Leadership is very subjective and it's very personal. So giving students different opportunities to explore that. That's what I have. So I will open up and
exactly match this with higher. Do you see any trends like demographically? Because I'm really kind of on earlier about gender differences, competence over competence. Like, do you see women grading themselves lower than men and grading themselves higher?
I did not look at that. I will say,
class of over 200 versus a class of 29. And alternative grading didn't seem to work with the larger number of classes. Have you ever tried to consider AI to help you in your grading setting?
I have not. And I will say,